Wait, there's a combo list? Oh, not really. I remember beating Heavenly Sword on the hardest difficulty back when it was first released. I don't remember it being terrible, but I don't remember it being great either. Right out the gate, let's get into the biggest disappointment. The Heavenly Sword sucks. A weapon that has the ability to change forms should be amazingly fun to use. The different forms should transition seamlessly, and your combo potential should be incredible. It's just not. You have a barely existing combo system, which you'll find isn't a problem, because I beat the entirety of the game by pressing the triangle button over and over again. I pressed the triangle button so much that I actually wore it out and had to swap controllers. Granted it was an older controller. So the sword has three forms: dual swords, chain, and greatsword. Chain is worthless, and is used almost exclusively as a way to avoid projectile attacks. You use it seriously like 4 or 5 times in the game, one of which is during a boss fight. The quick is the balance style. It attacks faster but deals less damage than the greatsword. I found it useful in all of one place. Greatsword should just be the default weapon. It's clearly the best that Heavenly Sword has to offer. It deals the most damage per hit, and the way the combat is structured, attack speeds don't really matter. The forms have no cool, transitionary attacks. You see in the cutscenes and the super style attacks that Nariko can and does seamlessly flow from twin swords to chain swords to greatsword and all matters in between. You just can't do that in the game. There's no way to go from chain to greatsword while attacking. It wouldn't even be hard. Bloodborne deals with two-form trick weapons in a single and elegant way, where you simply get a transitionary attack between forms. So you have to stop attacking momentarily to change your stance, but I didn't think this was a big deal at all, since the only remotely useful weapon is the greatsword. Enemies in Heavenly Sword are easily the worst kind of enemies you can have. They're passive, but they're also constantly defending. In most good action games, if an enemy is defending, you'd have some way to circumvent it. Things like a way to reposition yourself behind enemies like vaults in Prince of Persia, or a guard breaking attack, or some kind of enemy launch. Heavenly Sword is none of that. You just keep attacking until they let you hit them. So since the greatsword does the most damage per hit, it's the clear choice here. Passive and defensive enemies are the least fun to fight. They're frustrating and boring. Since the majority of enemies fall into this category and rarely attack, most of the battles are just really slow and dull. There are games that have passive enemies because they have an emphasis on having a really long and robust combo system. To allow you to pull off these long combos, enemies need to be fairly passive because the game actively wants you to finish the combos without being interrupted by enemy attacks. The problem is when you throw in the constantly defending attribute, it prevents you from performing the combos, which is really counterintuitive to making a game where you can actually have fun. The boss fights are very much the same as every other enemy in the game. They're more active than standard enemies, but they only allow you to get hits in when they let you. I think these trends were kind of why I felt like Demon Souls and Monster Hunter were so refreshing, because of the classic hit it until it dies vibe. The bosses are heavily scripted, they have phases, and they can't be hit until they allow you to. You can't hit Whiptail until she gets gassed out from hurling waves at you. You can't hit Roach until he gets his sword stuck in the ground. It's a style that can be alright when done well, but I usually find it to be poorly done. It makes the boss fights just have a lot of waiting around. Once you figure out what the game wants you to do, it becomes routine. You often need to repeat the same parts of the phases 3 or more times, at which point it feels like you're beating a dead horse. You're attacking constantly, hoping and praying for a hit to go through, but you're largely confined to getting the shots in when the game feels like letting you. You mainly get control of Kai because Nariko is captured during the events of Heavenly Sword. Kai's gameplay exists as 2 sections, a shooting gallery and fighting enemies on the ground in a similar way to Nariko. The shooting gallery is exactly what it sounds like. You're stationary and you aim and shoot whatever comes your way. Nothing really noteworthy. The more traditional combat doesn't work particularly well with Kai. You're essentially a mobile turret. Fighting enemies can be quite frustrating, largely because of the way projectiles are handled in Heavenly Sword. The sections where you play as Kai and have to fight enemies in the ground in close quarters are probably worse than fighting them as Nariko. Kai simply isn't set up to deal with enemies at close quarters, which forces you to run a fair distance from them and then take a pot shot. These sections can be frustrating to deal with, especially when you're forced to use Heavenly Sword's favorite mechanic. Aftertouch is used constantly throughout Heavenly Sword. The idea is that you can have some influence over a projectile's trajectory in slow motion after they are thrown or shot. You're basically forced to use Aftertouch for both Kai sections, general puzzle solving, and turret sections. There is a deceptive amount of turret and crossbow sections in Heavenly Sword. A very large chunk of the game requires you to use Aftertouch. The trajectories involved in Aftertouch can be pretty strange. It's almost parabolic. It rarely feels like you're going to hit exactly where you want, more just, ballpark area.
The shuttle's trajectory is taking it this way. Fort Lee at the westernmost, Forest Hills at the easternmost. My estimate is that it'll hit the George Washington Bridge.
I found that if you over or undercompensate in your initial adjustments, it's almost always unsalvageable. It's better to just let it go and take another shot and try it again. The shooting gallery sections as Kai aren't so bad because they're quite a bit more forgiving. Kai on the ground is a lot different. You need to run away from enemies and take pot shots. A lot of the time there are obstructions in the environment which cause you to have to do very close proximity, high angle shots with the Aftertouch over obstacles, which is very difficult to pull off and very annoying to deal with. I tried to stop doing them and just resorted to praying for no-scope headshots for most of those battles. The puzzle sections require some very precise control. There's one where you have to bounce a sword off an object multiple times and it's needlessly difficult. There aren't that many puzzles, but they're all super obvious to figure out. The issue is that they're difficult to pull off, and you'll most likely require multiple attempts to get it right just because of Aftertouch. The turret sections absolutely feel somewhat luck-based. Hitting specific parts on the catapult was one of the worst parts of Heavenly Sword. It was frustrating, and I shot what felt like hundreds of cannonballs at the targets. It also felt really inconsistent. I thought sometimes I got a dead-on hit and it wouldn't register, and other times I thought I missed and it would hit. Aftertouch is defaulted to motion controls, so I highly suggest the second you start, you turn that garbage off and you go for the sticks. It makes it significantly better, but unfortunately it's still not perfect. The worst part is it never felt like I was improving. I never felt like I was getting good at Aftertouch.
I know my trajectories.
You use it constantly throughout the game and it always felt like a total crapshoot. You use Aftertouch so much that it makes me believe that they were either so proud of it or so confident that people would like it that they didn't bother to make any other mechanic. Well, besides their favorite thing. Heavenly Sword throws QuickTime events in, but they don't actually happen that often. It's refreshing that they aren't everywhere, but at the same time it feels like why even have them at all? I've talked a lot about QuickTime events in the Order 1886 and in my Until Dawn videos, so that's enough for now. We'll just move on. Some of the graphics and scenes hold up, but it definitely has that really early PS3 look about it. A lot of the scenes also look really awkward and bad. They clearly focused a lot on facial motion capture for like King Bohan, but there are scenes with Nariko that just look downright terrible. There are also inconsistencies with things like volume during certain segments where important stuff gets washed out. Other than that, there's not really a lot to complain about. It looks a bit dated, but that's alright because it came out like 10 years ago. So one of the things that Ninja Theory should be commended for is the sheer amount of enemies that they get on screen during certain parts of the game. During the turret defense sections, and while you're on the ground during the God mode at the beginning and end of Heavenly Sword, there's a lot of guys on screen and it's really impressive, especially for an early PS3 title. Just an absolute ton of enemies on screen. It's really impressive. I think it would have been great if they really emphasized those moments, but instead they took the way safer route of really small scale battles, and that's not as cool to me. You can't do any of the fun stuff you see in the cutscenes. It's a problem with these action-adventure games. The game wants you to feel flashy and cool, but it never lets you do it yourself. It only shows it to you in the pre-done scenes. The QuickTime event scenes, the super style attacks, they all look really flashy and impressive, but you can't do it in-game. It wouldn't be that much of a problem, but your moveset in Heavenly Sword is so limited compared to these cutscenes that it really makes you feel pathetic. Like I said earlier, I beat most of Heavenly Sword by mashing the triangle button until it broke. Heavenly Sword is not a hard game. You can checkpoint hop your way through most boss fights. So that kind of turns it into more just relying on grinding attempts than actually needing to get good at it. In terms of general combat, King Bohan is by far and wide the hardest part of Heavenly Sword. And that's fitting because it is the finale. For some reason I thought I should deviate from my developed style in the last fight of the game. I died several times before remembering I was playing Heavenly Sword, and that every enemy's weakness is the triangle button. I stopped using the greatsword and swapped to the dual swords and spam triangle. And guess what? I won. But Heavenly Sword's combat isn't the most challenging thing about it. Oh no. Aftertouch was by far the most difficult and frustrating thing. You have to use it constantly, and it never feels like you get better at it. Quicktime events are also deceptively challenging. I think they have a rather odd timing that can be difficult to get right. Especially because you don't do many of them. It just feels kind of off. But overall, nothing was particularly hard. A few attempts at bosses or quicktime events is all it takes to get through. Heavenly Sword is on the shorter side at 5 hours, but it still feels a bit long. I think it's because it mostly feels like the whole game is worthless. Heavenly Sword would probably work as like a short film, but it gets drawn out to like 5 hours. Really, the only thing that matters in Heavenly Sword is taking up the sword and destroying King Bohan's army. The things you're doing in Heavenly Sword feel completely unrelated to those key points. You're fighting the army, then you're rescuing your comrades, then you're playing as Kai and rescuing Nariko because she got put in prison. Then you're playing as Nariko in an arena, then you're going back, and it just feels like the game should have just been an extended battle versus King Bohan's army for the entire runtime. So Nariko and her clan are on the run from King Bohan's army, who wants the Heavenly Sword. Shen gives Nariko ownership of the Heavenly Sword. She is tasked with keeping it away from King Bohan at all costs, even if it means abandoning her clan and running away. The Heavenly Sword is the sword of a god, and it's not meant to be used by mortal men. So it's really no surprise when Nariko picks it up and starts using it against King Bohan when her clan is captured. But instead of killing Bohan right then and there, she jumps off a cliff. King Bohan holds up in a city thing and sends his various generals and lackeys to take out and kill Nariko. Kai finds Nariko and tells her where the captives are. Nariko fights her way in, fighting Flying Fox and Whiptail before being captured by Bohan, who forces her to fight in the arena. Kai breaks in and finds the Heavenly Sword and gives it to Nariko, who uses it in the arena to fight Roach. Flying Fox is ordered to kill Nariko and Kai. Kai is deathly afraid of Flying Fox because he killed her mother and clan. After a lengthy chase sequence, Flying Fox throws Kai off a giant birdcage and her neck snaps. Nariko fights Flying Fox, but it turns out that Kai wasn't actually dead and shoots him in the head. Nariko regroups with her clan and a final battle ensues. Nariko destroys hundreds of Bohan's men, but eventually succumbs to the cursed sword. Nariko whines about dying to the god, and the god decides instead of listening to this garbage to give Nariko an extra hour or two of life. Nariko fights King Bohan, who is powered up by another god, the Raven Lord. Nariko wins, then dies because of the sword. Kai is made the protector of the Heavenly Sword and will never get a sequel because this game was awful. Oh look, another flash forward. This is going to get addressed in another video along with the Order 1886 and a couple other games, but I'll pose you a question right now. If I know Nariko is going to die, why should I get attached to or care about her? Honestly, it would make more sense to just seal the sword away in a cave and have it be lost to the ages instead of publicly declaring that you have it. It makes the events really dumb, because all Bohan wants is the sword. You could just give it to him and save yourself a lot of grief. Especially considering that if he ever uses it, it'll just kill him like it does for Nariko. The clan is tasked with protecting the sword, but it's never really expanded upon. Are there consequences if they lose it? Will they all be killed by an angry god if they give it away or leave it somewhere? It's all just kind of loose, and it needed a bit more fleshing out. Heavenly Sword would probably work better as a short film, or like an introductory segment to another game. The main plot points are: Insane King is wiping out your people because he wants a powerful artifact. One of the members of the clan uses the artifact to save the people, sacrificing themselves in the process. You know, that's it. That's not really enough to carry the game for a 5-hour runtime. It works best as a really generic legend or backstory to another story. I'm not saying it can't work, but you need to care about the characters involved. If someone is going to make the ultimate sacrifice, it should be someone you care about, that you've learned to like throughout the events of the story. Nariko doesn't win you over. She comes off incredibly whiny and borderline sociopathic. She's given the most generic and stupid backstory of her father wanting to kill her as a baby because she had a cursed birth, and the entire clan hates her as a result. That isn't development. That's fishing for sympathy. It's so ham-fisted and so blatantly lazy. It's also all you get. There's nothing else besides Nariko making fun of a retarded person, which reinforces her as not a likable character. So what I don't understand is, why does she care about the clan anyways? They all hate her. She could have left at any time. She just abandoned the clan and her responsibilities because everyone in the clan apparently hates her. Doesn't make any sense. She needs some sense of attachment to the clan to have that kind of motivation for protecting it. I guess her motivation is loosely based on her mother that's long dead, but I don't buy it. It just feels sloppy and shoehorned in. The beginning of the game shows us just how awesome this sword should be. It cleaves through dozens of enemies in a single strike. Then it follows up by having the sword really be no more powerful than the standard swords you use at the 2 points throughout the game. It's really disappointing. You start the game with this really great power fantasy of cleaving through dozens of enemy soldiers. You're shown scenes of Nariko accomplishing impossible feats. Then you spend the majority of the time just beating on generic soldiers as if you were a regular person, and it feels like you got cheated. Andy Serkis as King Bohan and Steven Berkoff as Flying Fox are great in Heavenly Sword. I would go as far as to say they are the best parts of this silly little game. I genuinely wonder how much of their performance was just totally off the books. If they were keeping on script, the writer and director did a really good job. They definitely steal the show, and that's a really bad thing, because it's terrible when I'm rooting for the villains. I should be rooting for Nariko and her tale of self-sacrifice, but instead I'm laughing at King Bohan's antics like it's a Saturday morning cartoon show. Every scene with Flying Fox and King Bohan is a joy to watch. Too bad everything else takes itself so seriously. You have to strike a really delicate balance between seriousness and campiness, and I don't think Heavenly Sword really does it. There are scenes that feel borderline inappropriate. You know, there are scenes with humor that are inappropriate, and everything else seems to take itself so seriously. It just feels really awkward. So other than King Bohan and Flying Fox, the rest of the cast is just kind of boring. Nariko and Shen are one note. Nariko in particular is actually very whiny and very unlikable. She comes off as almost sociopathic at times. I'm sure Kaya is supposed to be cute and endearing. It just comes off as really creepy and weird with how dissociated she is with murdering dozens of people in her games of Twing Twang. You know, the same goes for Roach. Roach would normally fall into the big, strong, dumb guy archetype, but they go full retard with him and it comes off as really uncomfortable and cringeworthy.
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
Then you've got Nariko actively making fun of Roach in the arena, which doesn't even really come off as funny. It just makes Nariko look like even more of a sociopath in awkward scene after awkward scene. So speaking of awkward, the scene after Flying Fox hangs Kai is probably the fucking funniest thing in the whole game. Just watch this scene in its entirety.
Just in time. The death of one so young is so delectable, and now you're here to enjoy the spectacle.
Killing Kai should be a trigger for the battle to start, but instead they follow it up with this laughably long sequence of awkward running that seems like it goes on forever. By the time the fight starts, you've almost forgotten that you just killed Kai. I seriously sat in disbelief when I saw that again. Oh, it makes me laugh. So I kind of forgot to talk about the entertainment value of the actual game. It's not fun. Aftertouch isn't fun to use. The shoot and gallery sections with Kai aren't fun to use. Fighting with Kai on the ground isn't fun. Fighting with Nariko isn't fun. The boss battles aren't fun. The quick time events aren't fun. The only thing Heavenly Sword has going for it is King Bohan, Flying Fox, and that one really awkward scene. That scene is just perfect. I wouldn't change a damn thing about it. So the first thing you have to do is make the Heavenly Sword fun to use. This is going to have multiple tiers, but the gist is that you got to make the sword fun. Part of it would be making enemies not block all the time so you can actually use the combos. The other part is actually making a combo system that has impact and doesn't feel tacked on. The progression system in Heavenly Sword is done horribly. You'd probably need to adapt it into a more traditional God of War, Devil May Cry, or Ninja Gaiden style where you get a currency that you can dump into your weapons and use to unlock specific combos. Right now you get like tokens or something, and honestly, it never feels like I was actually unlocking anything throughout the game. It was so rare that I unlocked something that I never bothered to even check what I got, whether it was good or not. You know, make me feel like I'm actually using a god sword. Let me do stuff that you only had the guts to show me in scripted sequences. Let me jump and throw a chain and drag a guy up to me and then slam to the ground with a greatsword. Let me do awesome shit like that, and you know, you can overlook a lot of the other flaws. I think Aftertouch is an interesting mechanic, but I think it needed to be R&D'd a little more. You can use it freely throughout the game, but it doesn't feel good to control. I think you could fix it so if you had like a trajectory line and you could see where you were going to hit while in slow motion, then you can make the adjustments and just let it go instead of sitting there doing micro adjustments in real time for the entire duration of the flight. It's also used, you know, far too often. I would probably just make it something that's exclusive to the Kai segments. I'd honestly just remove the turret sections because, well, you know, we should be down there kicking ass with the Heavenly Sword. I genuinely think most of the content in Heavenly Sword could be scrapped. The big battles are the most fun and technically impressive thing about Heavenly Sword, so why not expand upon it? If you made Heavenly Sword all take place in that giant battle, it may have been better. Now, obviously there would need to be breaks and individual goals to keep things fresh, but if you spent the majority of the game in these large-scale battles, I think it would have been more fun. I guess that's kind of like a more Musou Dynasty Warriors style game, as opposed to like the action-adventure they were aiming for. You could vary it by having you do things that disrupt the army rather than actively fighting it as well. Things like sabotage certain parts and getting out, or defending the retreating army. I just think the way the plot is structured, it should be like a full-scale Total War scenario. You should be outnumbered and outgunned, but Nariko opts to use the sword to save the people, and that would be the X factor that turns the tides in their favor. I think it could work that way. As it is now, I don't think it works plot or gameplay-wise. It's not good. There are some fun things like Flying Fox and King Bohan, but you can always watch that on YouTube. Combat is unbelievably shallow, and it's downright disappointing with all the missed opportunities of using the Heavenly Sword. It teases you with its power in the beginning, only to take it away for 90% of the game. Aftertouch is used far too often, and it doesn't feel that good to use. The main characters, Nariko, Shen, and Kai, are either one-note or unlikable. The enemy cast is a 50-50 split, with Bohan and Flying Fox stealing the show, but Whiptail being one-note, and Roach is basically defined by being retarded. It's not worth the effort to play, or the 5-hour runtime. It's boring for most of the game, and frustrating for the rest of it. It kind of feels like the game is kicking me in the nuts, you know, which is fitting, because so many of Nariko's moves involve some kind of nut kicking. Don't play this game. I could have picked anything else, but I picked another Ninja Theory game.